Okay, so in the last video, we added an FK-IK switch to this rig. It's almost done. We're just gonna do some cleanup on it, and I'm just gonna fix the foot and the hip with the IK, just so it works a little bit cooler with the animator. I'm just gonna fix some quaternion rotation real quick. If you extrude a control in Blender, it goes quaternion instead of the bone that you extruded it from, which is a little weird. So if I just hit E, and I extruded that control, if I click on it and go back to pose mode, it is a quaternion rotation order compared to Euler if you extrude it from an Euler controller. So I'm just gonna delete that bone that I made. And to fix this, I'll just hit A to select everything. And you can mask change rotation by hitting Control R. And you can set rotation mode of all these controls at the same time. And I'll do XYZ Euler for now. I'm not really worried too much about my rotation order just for this example. If I was doing a production rig, I would spend a lot more time thinking about the order of rotation for each joint. So right now I'm going to flip it to IK. So I click on my root bone here, and I'm going to put the IK switch up to 1 just so that my controller is in IK for now. I'm going to hide a couple things that I don't need to see. So these two piston controls here, I don't need to see these anymore. I'm just going to hit M to move them all the way over to here. The FK controls, I don't really need to see while I'm working on these IK functions. And this circle here I'm going to hide as well. So I'll grab this circle first, and I'll just hit H to hide it. I'll click back on the rig. The only real pieces I want to see right now are the deform bones, the IK bones, and I'll just leave the root on for now as well. And I'm going to go back to pose mode. So if I turn X-ray onto the joints, I don't really need to see the leg right now, so I can go to View, Local View, Toggle Local View. When I move the IK target, it's moving that really nice, and that's working out well. And I have this FK joint here that, actually if I turn the FK controllers back on, will push that leg. And that's exactly what I want it to do, and that's a really nice feature, the way that's working out. It allows me to rotate the hip down, but also allows me to grab the IK foot up. And it allows me to move the entire rig as one unit as well. There's one issue though, and that's that the feet controllers are still connected to the deform bone here, so that when I push the IK bone out, the foot controllers stay with it. And let me actually just exit local view to show you what's happening to the geometry. So local view, toggle local view. I kind of want that foot to stay flat all the time, no matter where I'm moving it. So that, let me zero this out. When I bring the hips down, and I'll parent that up better to this control here. When I bring this down, see how the foot's rotating? I don't want that to happen. I want the foot to remain static. I'm going to do this with a constraint. So let's go back to local view, and I'm going to grab my IK target down here, and I'm just going to use it to duplicate this controller. So I'm going to hit tab, I'm going to do shift D, and I'm just going to scale this down. If I do control alt S as well, I can scale the setting on it as well, or the B-bone display setting. I'm going to click on the bone tab, and I'm just going to rename this foot underscore IK underscore constraint dot left dot 001. And I'm going to grab the foot controller here and shift click on this controller and just do Control P, keep offset. Now this foot IK constraint dot left controller is actually going to parent to my deform leg dot 003 because I want it to still go with the FK controllers. So I'm going to do Control P, keep offset. And then in pose mode, I'm just going to do a copy transforms from my IK target to that foot controller. So I'll select on my IK target. I'll shift click on that new control I just made. I'll do pose, and I'll do it manually this time. Constraint, add with targets, copy transforms. So now, when I move my foot, see how the foot is staying static, and you'll probably be able to see it on the geometry better. So I'll go view, local view, toggle local view, and I'll just go to front mode. And watch as I move the foot to the side. See how the foot is staying flat? That's what I want in IK, but I have a problem. When I flip from IK to FK, the foot stays here. So what I need to do is on this new foot controller that I added, I need to drive the influence of that copy transforms back to the FK. So I've already built this driver on my deform bone here. I can just right click, copy driver, right click on this, left click on this new controller that I made, right click, paste driver. Now, when I drive that value from that foot to my IK to my FK, it goes to that piece. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of a lag here, and that's just because these are connected bones. So their copy transforms are overriding it. This is really easy to fix. I just click on this bone here. I'm gonna hit tab. I'm gonna go to the bone tab. Under relations, I'm just gonna make it connected. So what this does is even though it has a copy transforms constraint to that IK bone, as I come back here and I click on my root bone and switch between them, I'm gonna get a really nice smooth change between that constraint. So now when I click on my IK bone here and I move it, I keep a really static foot there. So a couple things that I need to fix though is that this controller here is parented to the root, and I actually want it to be parented to this hip controller here. So I'll hit tab and I'll do Control P, keep offset. So now when I move the hip controller down, I get that IK motion. And I'll turn X-ray off so you can really see it. And you get that motion. So I'm going to move my IK target and my pull vector just to another layer by hitting M just to clean up my rig. These deform bones and the IK bones, the animation team really never needs to see. They only really need to see the FK and the IK controllers. So I'll grab this and I'll give it a shape under bone tab. I'll give it the circle for now. Under viewport display, I'll give it circle. And I'll just make it a little bit smaller. Under the pull vector, I'll do the same thing. I'll give it a circle. I'll make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to put these both in a bone group under the armature tab here. I'm going to go to bone groups, add, and I'm just going to name it IK underscore controller. And I'll make the color orange and I'll assign it. I'm just going to turn off my axes view here under viewport display because I don't need to see them anymore. And now I can move these controllers. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more cleanup. I'm going to select on the root node and I'll just give it that circle shape. Now that's off axes and that looks a little bit weird. So what I'm going to do is actually go to object mode and just add another circle. This will just be another rig shape that I add. And I'll click on that root node and that's probably going to be circle.001. I'll probably rename these later, but that's fine for that shape there. And I'm going to do this up the rig. I'll just add these all with the circle control and it should be fine. This one I'm actually going to give that circle. No, I'll give it circle 001 for now. And I'll just do that for every control here. And I'll just make these a little bit smaller too. And these ones too, just a little bit smaller just to differentiate them from the root node. And I'll select all those controllers. I'll go to the armature tab and I'll add a new layer here. I'll just name it controls and I'll assign it. And my default, I'll just make these to be a white color. So now I can move that and I'll turn the body file back on. And I have the hip controller there that moves the leg. And that's going to move the leg from there as well. And that's my FK controller. And here, if I want to, I can switch to FK and rotate it like that if the robot's falling through the air or something. Now there's something else we have to do, and that is the other side of the robot. So if I hit Alt-H, I show all those objects. With the rig selected, I'm going to go to edit mode. And let's actually go to local view right now. Local view, toggle local view. And I'm going to turn on all of the layers where I have controls. So I want to mirror all of my settings from here over to the other side. Since I've named everything correctly, I can select on all these joints here. I'm just going to turn on X-ray just in case I've missed anything. That's looking fine. And now I can go to Armature, Symmetrize. And it copies them all over to that side, names them all correctly with hip.right, and if I go to pose mode, will also transfer all of my constraints as well. Now, one thing it did not transfer is my influence drivers. So I have to remake those. I'll click on my root node and I'm going to add a new property, and I'm just going to call this IK switch underscore right. And click OK. And I'm going to copy that data path. Same thing we did with the other side. I'm going to right click on the deform bone, go to the constraints, right click on influence and go to add driver, type in var. I accidentally turned on use self. I'll turn that off. I'll make it a single property. The property is the rig, and I'll paste in the data path. So that's looking good there. But you'll notice that it's breaking with the IK here, and I'll show you why that's happening. When you mirror joints in Blender, it also mirrors the axes. So if I turn my axes on, you'll notice that my X on this side of my rig are actually pointing in the opposite direction. For this rig, I actually don't want that. I'm fine with them being the same axes on both sides. Just because this is a leg, if it was an arm sticking straight out in T-pose, I might do it a different way. So to fix this with all my layers turned on, I'm just going to hit Tab. I'm going to go to this view here front, and I'm going to select this entire leg here. So you can see that the axes are different just by the Z. The Z on these ones is pointing this way, and this one's pointing this way. With this leg here selected, if I do armature, bone roll, recalculate bone roll, positive X, global, now they're the same. But there is a downside to this, and that is when I try to mirror animation, it might not work as well. Let's try it. Let's grab this piece here, and let me finish with the drivers really quick actually. Let me just copy this driver here. Now that I fixed that bone roll to this transforms here, and I'll grab on this deform bone here and I'll paste the driver again. And I'll grab on the foot controller here with that copy transforms, and I'll paste the driver there too. So I'll put both legs in FK for this test, and I'll just swing the leg out like that. If I do Command C, Command V, that pastes the animation. But if I do Shift Command V, it'll paste the action. But see how that's looking that way? That's not ideal for an animator. I would almost expect it to do that. That's why the roll was flipped, is to allow for that. For this rig, I'm actually going to flip that back now, and I'm going to show you how I'll fix it. So we'll grab all these bones here in edit mode, and I'm going to go to armature, bone roll, recalculate roll, global negative X. Now, when I go back to pose mode and I grab on this FK control here and rotate it out, and I do Command C, Shift Command V, I get that nice mirroring of the action. But my IK is broken because now the IK pull vector is looking in the negative X. I can put in 180 here to fix this, or I can do one other thing. I can grab the pull vector in edit mode and I can grab it behind the leg. But now my pull vectors are in the wrong spot. They're not matching each other. I have another fix for this. I'm going to undo that change. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this controller and I'm going to move it behind the leg. And then I'm going to parent it back to the pull vector. This is actually going to be my pull vector now. So if I grab the name of this and I go back to my rig in pose mode and I select on the FK bone down here and I go to the constraints for the pull vector, I'm just going to paste this name in and it flips around. Now, since this now is moving my leg back and forth, but it's parented to this controller here. So now when I move both of these, you can see that they're actually both moving the knee. But the one on my right leg is now moving in the opposite direction. And I can fix that in a couple of ways. I'm going to do something different. With this controller here, I'm actually going to parent it to the root. So I'm going to hit Tab and do Control P, keep offset. Now I'm going to use a constraint here from this front pull vector to this back one. I'm going to do Shift Control C, and I'm going to do a copy location. But I'm going to do it in local space and local space. And I'm going to invert all the axes. So now when I move this to the left, it moves that way, and it's an inverted axis. What it allows me to do is grab both pull vectors and move them in the same direction and get the knees to move. And I'm doing this all without giving any value to my pull angle. There's other ways to do this. This is just the way I'm doing it to finish this rig here. I'm going to flip to IK on both the left and right leg, and I'll just grab these controls and test it out. Yep, that's looking good. So I'm going to hit backslash on my number pad to bring back my rig, and I just need to parent some of these objects up to my new controllers here. I'm going to flip the viewport display back to default, and I'll just go through to parent up these last couple objects. So I'll grab this piece, click on the rig, and I'll just turn on just the deform bones. That way I don't have to worry about seeing anything else. I can turn off axes as well, as I don't need to see them. And I'm going to do Control P, bone. And I'll just go along and I'll do these pieces all to this bone here. And I'll do this cylinder and these pieces to this bone here. Now there's a couple different ways you could rig this. I kind of did this in a way to really show how the FK-IK switch would work and to keep my pull angles at 0. Now it's not necessarily a bad thing to have value on your pull angles. Just keep in mind as to why you need them and what the values are actually doing. I really don't like things in rigging where you might not know the explanation as to why you're doing things. I always like to dig into the surface and figure out why it's actually working that way and what the reasoning is behind some of the pieces in a rig. So this is all set up now with the bone parents. I'll test it out by just moving the root node around. And I just have a couple pieces that aren't parented. So I'll parent this hip controller up to this controller right here, this circle controller. And I think I left some pieces in the foot. Yeah, I didn't do those piston pieces again. So that piston, I put the bones way off in this layer over here. So I'll select them here. And I'll select on my rig. Again, if you find the rig difficult to select, just select a bone that's not visible in the geometry. I'll go to pose mode. I'll parent it to this piston here. I'll select on this lower one, click on the rig, go to pose mode, click on this lower piston, and parent it here. So this is pretty much done now. Let me just hide some of these circle pieces here. And one thing I like to do is I like to turn off relation lines. I find sometimes when you have like 100 bones, they just get in the way. And I'll turn off X-ray as well. Now I can just sort of test things out. Yep, I can move that around. I don't need this controller back here to be visible, so I'll just move it to one of the back layers. I can turn off my deform bones. I don't need them to be visible. I don't need my piston bones to be visible. And I'm just going to test some things out. So I'll grab the hip control here, and I'm just going to move it around. Yep, so that's working well. It's working the way I want it to work for this IK setup. And I'll just test moving this foot out. And that's my FK controller there. Yep, so that's working. And yeah, I'm just sort of going through and just testing all my joints and making sure that they work. And I'll just test out these joints up here. Yep, it's working well. Grab on the body joint here. Again, sometimes with Blender 2.8, I'm finding selecting controllers difficult. For that, I would probably just make better shapes. And yeah, that's working well. Another way to select joints is to just expand your hierarchy and just start going through the hierarchy of the bones here if you want to find a specific one. So here I want to test out the rocket, just make sure that's moving. And the rocket over here, I'll make sure that's moving, that's good. And the gun, yep, that's moving as well, and that's moving as well. Okay, these wires back here, let's hook them up really quick. I'm going to use a technique called a hook. And to do this, I actually need to select the rig and pose mode and then go to the wire and select it and use a hook command. So I'm going to go to object mode and I'm just going to select my 4 wire pieces here. And I'm just going to go to view, local view, toggle local view, just to isolate them. So my gun controller is right here. So I have to make sure that that is my active controller that's selected. And I'll go back to object mode. Then I'll shift click on the wire. I'll hit tab. I'll select on these pieces down here and I'll do Control H, hook to selected object bone. Now I'll go back to object mode and I'll click on my rig and I'll click on my rig and I'll go to pose mode. And when I move that around, it's just moving those wires around, just get some secondary motion. I'm just going to test something out though. I'm going to grab the body control and move it. I'm making sure I don't get something called a double transform. So I'll click on this control here. I'll make sure it's active. I'll go to object mode. I'll click on the wire. I'll hit tab. I'll click on these pieces here. I'll do Control H, hook to selected object. And I'll go back to object mode, click on my rig, go to pose mode, and I'll just test that out. What this is actually making, if I click on the wire, and I go to the modifiers, it's making this hook modifier here, which is very useful for little things like this. Okay, same thing up here. I'll make sure that my rocket controller here is active. I'll go back to object mode, shift click on the wire, hit tab, click on these verts here, Control H, hook to selected object bone. Go back to object mode, click here. I'll go back to pose mode, click on this piece or this missile controller here, go back to object mode, hold shift, click on the wire, go to edit mode, select on those pieces that I want, and do Control H, hook to selected, I did hook to selected object bone there. So now I'll go back to object mode and I'll go view, local view, toggle local view, and I'm not going to get a lot of movement out of these pieces. So if I go to pose mode, you'll see that I can basically move that and I just get a little bit of movement out of the wires. If I wanted to make a more advanced setup for this, I would. Just I know that these aren't going to be moving too much. I just want that little bit of secondary motion. Same with the gun controller here. There's other ways to rig wires. I'd like to go into rigging wires in more detail though, in a different video series. So this is ready to go. Some things you can do for next steps is to just make the controller shapes look a little bit nicer. I'll probably do that for the final upload. When I do push it out, and I'm just going to fix these pistons, this shape right here. And again, I just selected on these verts here, and I did that with a normal viewpoint, and I find using the actual translate gizmo easier for this. But that's a really good start for a final rig and getting into more advanced rigging. After this, you may even want to look into adding a foot roll to the IK here. But the IK just adds a really fun element to this rig while keeping the pull vectors in check here. So I'd pass this off to an animator for testing now to see what they think and to try out. And they might come back with changes or requests for more functionality. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, if there's anything here you want me to cover in more detail, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.